Hello, I'm Jeremy Vine, and this is Panorama. Dangerous criminals and sex offenders released from prison back into society only to commit further serious crimes. We're told few slip through the net. But exclusive research for Panorama reveals there are more than we're being told about.
Although they say he's monitored, he wasn't monitored enough to stop something as serious as what he's done.
We witness for ourselves the crucial decision-making designed to keep communities safe.
The female victim fought back as she feared she would be raped, and her trousers and top were ripped by the offender.
Its strengths.
We do know he's dangerous, and it's about managing him then in the community.
And its limitations.
It pays never to forget that a great deal of our offenders are extremely intelligent, and by the nature of their offending, often very devious people by nature.
Today, the government released its annual report on how it protects the public from the most dangerous offenders on their release from prison. The report tells us how many serious crimes are committed by known violent criminals and sex offenders. Tonight, Panorama can reveal there are, in fact, many more. So why has the exact number of these crimes been quietly filed away? Is it because, despite all the assurances, there is no sure way to be confident that when freed, a serious offender won't repeat their crime?
Earlier this year, Britain was horrified by the brutal murders of French students Laurent Bonhomme and Gabrielle Ferrez. Now Laurent Bonhomme's parents have invited me to France to talk for the first time about what happened to their son and how they hold our criminal justice system responsible. When the boys left their homes here in France, they were two typical students, excited by what life in London had to offer. But within 2 months of their studies, their lives were ended tragically, and now their families are having to live with the consequences. Laurent's mum, Lydie, is still coming to terms with her son's death.
He called me about 1 week before he died, saying that all his exams were okay. And was so happy. That's the last time I heard his voice.
The boys were talented students invited to study DNA at London's Imperial College. In July last year, police discovered their bodies in a burnt-out flat. Laurent Bonhomme and Gabrielle Ferrez had been murdered in one of the most sickening crimes this country has ever seen. That's not the only reason it became notorious. One of the killers, Dano Sonics, was a violent criminal convicted of armed robbery and knife crimes. He was placed on the multi-agency public protection arrangement, a scheme designed to monitor the most dangerous offenders on their release from prison. Sonics was wrongly placed at the scheme's lowest level and supervised by a single probation officer.
Well, I discovered that Sonics should have been in jail, that he was a very dangerous human being. And I heard there was a report about him saying that he was dangerous and violent, and nobody took care of it. So that kind of action could have saved our children, of course.
Sonics and his accomplice Nigel Farmer broke into Laurent Bonhomme's flat as he and Gabrielle slept. They tortured the French boys at knife point for their cash cards and PIN numbers. CCTV captured Sonics hiding his face on his way to use them as Farmer kept the students hostage. Laurent was stabbed 196 times, his friend Gabrielle 47. The two would then set alight in their flat. This is Nigel Farmer turning himself in before the authorities caught up with Sonics. He should have already been back behind bars after he was caught handling stolen goods, but mistakes made by probation, police and the court meant he was still free.
I know that you've met and spoken to Jack Straw and you received an apology.
Laurent's father cannot accept that so many errors were made and that the MAPA system failed to protect his son. Do you think the mistakes made by the police and the probation service and the justice system led to the death of your son and Gabrielle?
Sure. It's because they have not do their job. If someone is building a wall, is responsible. If the wall fall, the person who live inside. So if someone wants a big responsibility, he has to have a big attitude and to take his responsibility. And Jack Straw is responsible of the Justice Ministry. He is the boss of the responsible of the probation service.
Justice Secretary Jack Straw apologised. The chief of the London Probation Service, David Scott, resigned amidst criticism of mismanagement. Scott accused the government of failing to financially support the service. The case has thrown a spotlight onto the system that is supposed to manage violent criminals like Sonics.
It seems to me that the Sonics case is a metaphor for what is going wrong with the government's supervision of offenders outside prison. The probation officer supervising Sonics had 127 cases to deal with. She was relatively young and inexperienced. They were short of senior probation officers in that division. And here was a young woman faced with supervising a man irregularly, that's to say, not all the time, but perhaps for 15 minutes a week.
To keep the public safe, dangerous violent criminals like Sonics and every sex offender are now referred on their release from prison to MAPA, the multi-agency public protection arrangements. These were introduced in 2001 in England and Wales by the then Home Secretary Jack Straw amid public outcry about offences committed by recently released offenders. MAPA brings together the police and probation service to assess what level of supervision an offender will need back in the community. Behind these doors, decisions will be made about what should be done to protect the public from some of the country's most dangerous criminals due to be released from prison on licence. We were granted exclusive access to a MAPA meeting in West Mercia.
He has been sentenced for sexually motivated violent offences. In a pre-sentence report interview, he disclosed he had followed females on at least 2 other occasions with the intention to commit sexual offences, stating on one occasion that he would have raped the victim.
The police, probation, children's services and mental health are holding their second meeting about a man due to be released from prison who attempted to rape a woman in a nightclub.
The female victim fought back as she feared she would be raped, and her trousers and top were ripped by the offender.
The agenda is tight. They have just 45 minutes to discuss today's evidence, including prison reports, psychological assessments and a statement from his victim.
When I saw him that night when he was arrested, it was horrible. He blamed me for the attack and accused me of hitting him. It was terrible and somehow seemed to make what he had done worse. I felt sick at the time and still feel sick now, thinking about him and what he said to me. At this moment in time, I feel that he has spoilt my life. I'm a fighter and I know that eventually I will get back to normal. I'm just surprised by how hard it has all affected me.
It's what's coming out to me really from these reports is that he represents still a very significant risk to women. Then I can't see anything that will at the moment prevent him from behaving like this in the future.
I think he said to said that the victim was asking for it just by being in the nightclub and was clearly blaming her.
That's right, yeah. The comments which he actually said as he's making himself known over the top of the toilet cubicle was quite revealing. I think he sort of said, "You want it, you slag, and you're going to have it." You know, so I think that reveals what he was thinking at the time.
Specifically then, do you see this case remaining in MAPA level 2?
But we're quite happy to keep it at 2 rather than 3. I just think he poses such a risk. I just wonder whether, in my view, he does anyway.
I think level 3, yeah.
Okay.
The level decided by the team will affect the actions they'll take to watch him. There's 50,000 offenders monitored on one of 3 levels under MAPA across England and Wales. Level 1 offenders are managed by just one agency. They fall into 2 categories: violent offenders who must check in with their probation officer, or sex offenders who are visited by the police. Level 2 are usually watched by both police and probation. Level 3 are known as the critical few. These are considered such high risk, some even require around-the-clock surveillance. But only level 2 and 3 offenders are discussed at MAPA meetings. Sonic should have gone through this process, but he was wrongly classed at level 1 and received the lowest level of supervision.
The other thing is, within the prison, there's no suggestion here that he's been seen by anybody from the InReach.
The MAPA team includes an appointed layperson to raise their concerns. In the case of this violent offender, I've been invited to ask any questions.
If you could just summarise the action you're going to take to try and protect the public from what sounds like a very, very dangerous individual.
You know, I would want, first of all, the police officer to meet him when he comes out with probation, to actually let him know that we're very concerned about him, we're going to be keeping a close eye on him. I would want to make sure whichever area he goes to that the neighbourhood police team knows about him, so they have a picture of him, they know what he looks like, they know the risk he presents.
Surely individuals like this should be sentenced for a very long time in prison. That would be the general public's view. And if MAPA agencies were advocating that that's what should be done, is that not what MAPA agencies do?
With regards to this offence, the charge isn't an attempted rape, it's sexual touching. He's no previous convictions. He wouldn't have been assessed as dangerous at that stage because of the relevant previous factors. And that's what MAPA essentially is for. We do know he's dangerous, and it's about managing him then in the community. This is what we work with.
We operate within the law, and the law determines that this man will be released from prison on a given date, subject to licence, which again is for a determinate period. So we have to work with reality, and that's the reality of sentencing.
The number of offenders on the MAPA scheme keeps rising, up 11,000 in just 4 years. The probation service also has record numbers of offenders to manage on licence because of the pressure on prison places. Harry Fletcher is the chair of NAPO, the Probation Officers Union.
MAPA works in theory, quite clearly, and it works for the 1,000 or so people who pose the highest risk. It also works effectively as it can do for the middle range of people, but the remainder, 39,000 low risk, are not supervised in the same intensive way because there aren't any resources to do it. And frankly, there aren't enough police officers or probation officers to cover the cases that we've got.
The majority of this low-risk group are registered sex offenders. The police are on the front line of their supervision.
Been his offender manager for quite a while now, so I have had...
There's over 31,000 sex offenders across England and Wales. Each force has a dedicated public protection team. Taryn Baddeley and Roger Savage are part of the unit that monitors sex offenders in West Mercia.
Main concerns about those that you manage in the community, what are they?
Probably my main concern is that often I can only act upon what they actually tell me. It pays never to forget that a great deal of our offenders are extremely intelligent, and by the nature of their offending, often very devious people by nature. And I have to be aware that they can be attempting to fool me on occasions.
I suppose one of the things that the general public are interested in is those that you are managing in the community, that you're keeping an eye on, should they be in the community?
I think we have a lot of very dangerous offenders who probably shouldn't be in the community, but we do our very best to manage their risk as effectively as we can. We can't manage them 24 hours a day, and if they can find a way to get through the system, they will and do on occasion.
Last year, there were no serious further offences recorded in West Mercia. Its Chief Constable, Paul West, is the ACPO lead on the management of violent and sexual offenders.
How do you think police prevent highly dangerous offenders committing serious further offences?
I think it's very difficult to prevent anybody who's intent on doing that, without literally being there 24 hours a day. But I think I can have a good degree of confidence that were the management arrangements not in place, because often it will lead to people being breached and sent back to prison, then the public wouldn't be protected in the way that they are, and you could anticipate that number would be significantly higher.
Roger and Taryn are on their way to visit a paedophile who has previously been sentenced to 20 years in prison for abusing young children.
Today we're going to do one of our visits to an offender we're monitoring at a very high risk level. His sentence related to serious sexual abuse on boys. I mean, he has been through the full MAPA system. When he was released from custody, he was at a level 3, and then obviously as his circumstances change, and we have then dropped the levels, and now he's level 1 now.
It took 18 months for MAPA to reduce the level of management after the offender completed a treatment programme, but this doesn't mean he is less risk.
Why have you stopped the vehicle?
Obviously we can't film any farther at this point for concern that we might identify where the person we're seeing today is living.
Well, they've just kicked me out of the vehicle and they won't let me go to see where the offender lives, but that's the law. Sex offenders' identities and whereabouts are protected from the general public unless there are exceptional circumstances. To film with this offender, we have to meet him in a police house and disguise his voice.
How are you today?
Fine, thanks. Yeah.
Anything happened since I last saw you?
I was on a train coming back from Birmingham, and a load of Boy Scouts were getting into the carriage where I was.
Yeah.
So I got up, moved to the next carriage. That's keeping myself safe.
Do you think you'd still get a sexual thought, say on public transport, for example, and there was a child near to you? Would you have a sexual thought about that child?
Not now. I've learned to control my sexual urges.
Yeah.
I don't look at children as like objects for sex anymore.
Yeah.
They're innocent people as far as I'm concerned now.
Yeah.
And to be left alone to get on with their lives. Yeah.
According to MAPA guidelines, a very high-risk offender like this one would be seen a minimum of once a month, a low-risk offender just once a year. Local neighbourhood policing teams also act as additional eyes and ears. But is this arbitrary way of picking up information enough to prevent an offender from striking again?
I think what we have now is much better than there being no arrangements, which was the situation before. It was cross your fingers and hope, once they've been released, that things don't go wrong. Look, it can never be perfect, but I think that those reoffending rates at the higher levels of supervision do indicate a certain amount of success.
To judge whether MAPA is actually working, each year the government publishes the numbers of serious crimes committed by offenders. These are around 70, including rape, murder and serious sexual assault every year. But these figures only relate to level 2 and 3. They've never included level 1 offenders, who are the least monitored. In Southampton, rapist David Tiley is a case in point. He was classed a level 1 sex offender. What he'd do next would not appear in the government statistics. David Tiley had been living in the community as a registered sex offender for 6 years, but he couldn't be trusted. 3 times he was sent back to prison for lying to the police about where he was living. On his release, he was classified a medium risk, and Hampshire police only had to visit him twice a year. When Tiley moved in with his girlfriend Susan Howe, the police warned her about his violent past. 4 months later, he stabbed Susan to death in a vicious attack and hid her body in the flat. Susan received regular visits from care workers to her home. 8 days later, one of her carers, Sarah Merritt, innocently knocked at the door. And what about this one, the wedding one?
Yeah.
Tiley murdered Sarah despite being on the MAPA scheme designed to protect the public.
This was the last picture she ever had taken of her. A couple of days before she died, that was.
He held Sarah at knife point, bound and gagged her, then left her in the flat as he went out to use her stolen cash card. When he returned, he raped and murdered her. Her husband Peter cannot understand the system that failed Sarah and left their 2 children without their mum.
Anybody would want to be with their loved ones in a time of need, and she had nobody. She would have been completely scared, not a soul to help her, nobody to hear her calls or anything. She was at the mercy of, obviously what we find out afterwards, a really nasty sex offender, and she suffered his full wrath. And to think he was one of thousands, it's monitored on a system to protect us from this sort of thing. Although they say he's monitored, he wasn't monitored enough to stop something as serious as what he's done. So I can't see how it worked.
The government makes no secret of the fact that 79 serious further offences were committed by level 2 and 3 offenders last year, but they have never released figures for level 1 offenders like Sonics and Tiley, even though they are counted. Cases like that of Michael Clark, a violent rapist who sexually assaulted and murdered his neighbour's 14-year-old daughter in her own home. Sex offender Peter Vosey, who snatched a 6-year-old girl from her bath before raping and dumping her naked in the street. Craig Bennett, a convicted paedophile who raped and violently assaulted a 12-year-old boy in a field after persuading him to look for his dog. All level 1 offenders the government hasn't told us about. Why wouldn't they want us to know about level 1 offenders?
I can only think that they're not published in full because the government would rather we didn't know.
Why wouldn't they want us to know?
I think the government wouldn't want the figures to be known widely because they could be seen as critical of government.
Under the Freedom of Information Act, we asked every police and probation area how many serious further offences were committed by level 1 offenders last year. Just over half responded, revealing there were 47 serious crimes by sex offenders and a further 78 by violent offenders. That's 125 serious further offences the government has kept out of the public eye. And that doesn't include crimes in areas that decline to give their figures. So why don't the government publish all the numbers?
We do publish figures for all serious further offenders.
For level 1s, level 2s and level 3s, are you sure?
We publish figures for the active level 2 and level 3 management of offenders, and we have general figures for further offenders.
You see, I just wonder whether the government are being honest with the public, because they tell us about the 79 offences committed by levels 2 and 3, but they don't tell us about the 125 offences committed by level 1s that we found out about, and that's
what the public need to know, the total figure, and not just a slice of it.
The figures are designed to put some information into the public domain about MAPA arrangements and how well they've succeeded over the year in reducing risk to the public. And serious further offences is one way of judging that.
The government, the Ministry of Justice, said they were going to publish the level 1 figures this year, but decided not to. So the reasons for not publishing this year and deciding to publish next year is?
It's making sure they're as accurate as they need to be in order to be official statistics.
Despite the fact they don't yet publish all the data, the government claims MAPA is a success, reducing the number of serious further offences committed by dangerous offenders coming out of prison. The reality is, it will not stop an offender if they're determined to commit further crimes.
What does the monitoring do? Because you're not seen every day. So the time between each visit by the team.
I don't know sometimes. I could go out and be followed at any time, but I keep myself safe. Wherever I go, I steer clear of any children.
But that's really difficult to do. So
it's certain times of the day I'll go out and do my shopping at the night time, and I know there's not going to be any children around like 9, 10 o'clock at night.
Do you accept that, despite the fact that you're being monitored, if you wanted to go on to commit another offence without anybody being aware, you could?
It's a possibility, yes.
The MAPA system offers some reassurance that we are protected, but it is limited. For the Bonomo family, it failed terribly. They are now comforted by letters of support.
This one's from Devon, this one's from Surrey.
We know your grief and anguish will never end. You have suffered what we as parents know would be the worst tragedy that any parent can have. I enclose a photocopy of a letter I received after writing to Jack Straw. My husband, Bobby, and myself thought it may be of some help with your case against the British government.
Now Laurent Bonomo's father is taking the British government to court to seek justice for their son and prevent our criminal justice system making the same errors again.
I can't accept this mistake. The consequence of the mistake is that my son is dead. And it's not only a mistake. I can't accept that he only was at the bad moment, in the wrong place. It's not a mistake. It's horrible. I can't accept.
Raphael Rowe reporting there on the limitations of the MAPA system. And if you go online, you can have a look at the true picture of reoffending in some detail right across Britain, as revealed by our Freedom of Information requests. It's bbc.co.uk/panorama. Next week, after Baby P and other failures,
the little girl is covered in bruises.
Panorama goes on the front line with emergency child protection officers.